Welcome to the 11th Annual SISE Day 2, Stage 2. First of all, just a quick update, quick recap. George Thomas, another SISE record, 37,000 event engagers and counting, so it's going to keep climbing every day, a new record. Again, Dr. Miner talked about, among other topics, zombie fires. That was our keynote speaker, zombie fires. Lesson in the way science is communicated and examples of climate tipping points. In systems thinking, Dave and Mariana talked about the problems with extractive economic relationships and the benefits of partnerships. And then our most recent speakers that we just came out of, Amy and James, Amy at Sunrun and James at ComEd, talked about what makes for good policy, as well as some of the challenges of the policymaking process. And meanwhile, the SISE fellows continue to submit great questions. We get great questions from the delayed feed as well. And also the SISE fellows, meanwhile, are working on their energy ecosystem report card. So it's been very, very busy, and we're halfway through. I think this is the halfway point. We've covered a lot of topics in the last few days, but they've been at a level of generalizations. We've talked about systems and sustainability and the policy and the policy-making process. But there's been one topic that has been coming up more often than others. In fact, it came up during the keynotes presentation as well, and that's transportation. There's something about this topic. It's this thematic topic. It's a magnet. It attracts, it pulls, it draws attention. Fortunately, our panelists today have extensive experience in this field, both from the 30,000-foot perspective down to the last mile. Adam Gromis is Public Policy Manager for Sustainability and Environmental Impact at Uber, and Mike Buff is the Manager of Infrastructure Strategy and Planning for Electrify America. And I know that there are a lot of questions, so instead of continuing with the introduction, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand it over to Mike. Mike, if you can set the context for us, let us know, what are we talking about when we talk about transportation, and with this special emphasis on the state of the industry?
Great. So hello, everyone. Eric, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Excited to be here and talk a topic that is near and dear to my heart around transportation electrification. I have a few slides just to sort of set the stage here. Let's see if I can just swap these. 1 second. All right, and can you all see my screens? Perfect. So that's great. So what I thought we would do today, first of all, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Mike Buff. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure Planning and Product Management at Electrify America. And what I wanted to do today is tell you a little bit both about our company, but also about transportation electrification more broadly and sort of where the industry stands. I suspect most of you all are familiar with Uber, and Adam will talk a little bit about their side of things. So Electrify America is maybe less of a familiar name, but growing. So we were founded in 2017 and have quickly grown to be the largest open DC fast charging network in the United States. By the end of this year, we expect to have over 3,500 DC fast chargers across the US. And that works out to be about 800 locations or 800 stations. We're also developing two small but growing businesses. One is around taking all of the insights that we've learned from building our own network and bringing those to develop customized charging solutions for commercial partners. And then the other is a home charging solution business. So we've recently launched a connected level 2 wall box, and we offer flexible installation options for our customers as well. Maybe before going too much further into who Electrify America is and what we're doing, maybe it's helpful to just sort of set the stage on where things stand in the industry. So historically, when we talk to consumers around EVs and EV adoption, The messaging we hear back from customers around concerns around EVs are pretty consistent. The themes really range around three things. One is vehicle range, the second is charging, and the third is vehicle cost. And so you can see here on the right-hand side of the slide, these are the top 10 purchase avoidance reasons that were identified by a company called Strategic Vision, but pretty consistently, these types of avoidance reasons show up every time entities go out and survey customers. And when we look at these top 10, 8 out of those top 10 answers fall into one of those three categories that I mentioned. So vehicle range, charging, and vehicle cost. The great news is that there's been a ton of progress in the industry on these topics. So the first element here is there's a much wider range today of vehicle makes and models, both in what's out there today as well as what's coming in the very near future. So whereas in the past we had seen mostly small sedans out there for vehicles to for customers to purchase, we now have big sedans, SUVs, and many pickup trucks coming in the very near future as well. But it's not just body styles. What we're also seeing is a significant increase in the range and charging power of those vehicles. So you can see at the top of the screen here, in 2016, the average non-Tesla EV that came to market had around 90 miles of range. Today, that number is up over, in 2021, is expected to be up over 250 miles of range. And along with it, maybe you can see the light blue line that tracks along towards the top. Along with it comes charging power, which is really the key indicator of charging speed of the vehicle. So that's really huge, huge change in the industry, and really means that the vehicles that are coming are much better suited to all sorts of use cases as well as to the needs of consumers. The other thing we're seeing is that vehicles are coming at all different price points. So you can see here along the bottom, there are volume segment vehicles such as the ID4, the Volkswagen ID4 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5. There are mid-range vehicles like the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and then of course premium vehicles like the Porsche Taycan, Audi e-tron, the Lucid Air, and the like. So what about charging itself? That's where Electrify America has really been focused. So back in 2018, we opened our first DC fast charging station in a little town called Chicopee, Massachusetts. It's been a totally crazy, unprecedented pace between 2018 and now 3 years later. We've got over 630 stations, DC fast charging stations built across the country, with now over 2,700 chargers nationwide. As I mentioned at the top, we're on track to have over 800 stations by the end of the year and 3,500 chargers. We've got 2 cross-country routes, which you can see in the map here on the bottom right, along I-70 and I-10. It's pretty rare that folks drive all the way from coast to coast, but having that coverage is really important for consumers to feel comfortable that they can really take that vehicle anywhere. All of our stations are non-proprietary, so they support all vehicles in the market, including Teslas with a widely available adapter. And the chargers at our stations range from 150 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts worth of charging. For those who aren't quite as familiar with the technology, 350 kilowatts works out to roughly around 20 miles of range per minute. So you basically pull into the station, plug in, go grab a cup of coffee, come back, and you've got 200 miles of range. So the investments in putting the infrastructure out there has really made a difference in enabling the auto manufacturers to actually bring these vehicles to market and sell them across 50 states. So at our stations, customer experience is really paramount for us. So this starts with the site hosts. We're always looking for the best locations, looking for the best experience for our drivers. You can see here a few examples of where we have stations. What's interesting in the EV space is because you're not dealing with hazardous materials, we can now site our charging stations, at malls, at major retailers, really try and fit charging into your life. The other thing around customer experience also comes down to technology. So I already mentioned the charging speeds. We're also the first network in the US to deploy plug-in charge technology on all of our chargers. So with plug-in charge, you can pull up, plug in your vehicle and the charger talk to each other. They authenticate the user, they start charging, and they handle billing all on the end. There's no need to take out a credit card, push buttons or anything. It works really seamlessly. It's really, it's an exciting technology and really the future of fueling. And finally, we focus a lot on refining our mobile app and the customer experience that drivers have through that. And then lastly, I wanted to keep things short here, but lastly, before I hand things off to Adam, I do want to touch on another piece of our work, which is around education and awareness of EVs. So we partner with a whole host of players across the space to develop content and campaigns to inform drivers around EVs. You can see on the left-hand side, we partner with Plug in America. We partner with a entity called Veloz to build these campaigns. If you haven't seen, there's one called Kicking Gas, which features Arnold Schwarzenegger as a car salesman. It's really funny. If you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to check it out. You can check those out at electricforall.org. We also have our own website called normalnow.com. This is a campaign that we developed that really leverages sort of humorous comparisons to past technologies that at once seemed a little bit weird, but now they're normal. But rather than talking about that, I'm going to tempt fate and see if we can get the video here to briefly show. This is a video of one of our Normal Now campaigns. This one is around online dating.
You fill out a questionnaire, you give your age, your sex.
So who are you? Who are you looking for?
Your
what do you
sexual
want?
preference, and if you're lucky, you meet your dream person.
Electric cars. Yeah, they're totally normal now too.
So I guess overall, our goal here is to get out the word, inform folks. As I mentioned, the industry is changing every year. The technology is getting better. And really electric vehicles are here and can be a great option for drivers. And so we spend a lot of time getting that messaging out. So with that, let me hand things over to Adam. See if we can get there. I think that's probably a good segue. Uber is doing a ton of great work in the space, both on the education side, as well as working to electrify their fleet. So with that, I will take a pause and hand things over.
Thanks so much, Mike. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up, Eric. Thanks so much, Mike. That was a fantastic presentation. You would be hard-pressed to find another entity around the world that has moved faster than Electrify America to put great charging out there, or who has worked harder to democratize the messaging around EVs and reach everybody in terms of what EVs can mean for any consumer. So it's been just a pleasure to watch Electrify America's progress, and Mike and his team. I have the distinct pleasure of being on the board of Veloz with Mike's colleague, Giovanni. And the aim there of the LOST is to make EVs accessible for everybody through marketing campaigns like the Arnold Schwarzenegger one. But you'll see as funny, if not funnier, content from Electrify America. So I do encourage everybody to hit YouTube and check out the rest of the things that they put out there. It's very, very good. What I will do is share a little bit about how we thought about electrification at Uber. I lead on sustainability policy at Uber. I've been here about 4.5 years. And I think all day long, how can I reduce the emissions from the rides that we serve around the world? And more, of course, the answer has been we need to help drivers shift into electric vehicles, among other things, which is no simple task, particularly because we operate in over 70 countries around the world as of now. And so it's a monumental task, but we're very excited. So I'll share my screen, present a few thoughts, and then I think after this, we'll open it back up to questions. Eric will help us field all of your questions, and we'll have a bit of a dialogue about what we've learned from all of this, or what new questions have arisen. Can everybody see the screen? Great. It's our great interest to be part of the solution set for cities everywhere that are just now, and in many cases, not even yet, just peering out from the last 15 months, 18 months of pandemic and saying, we've got to recover. And from our perspective, that has to be a green recovery. We learned ourselves during the pandemic that we can't possibly go back to business as usual. It quite frankly wasn't working. And during the pandemic, one of the few silver linings was looking out on clear skies, traffic-free streets, and asking the question, why can't we have more of this without the pandemic? And so it's been a great theme to see in cities around the world. I live in San Francisco. We had a lot of streets that were shut down to traffic for substantial portions of the pandemic. And a lot of people saying, how can we have more of this? How can we have more eating out on the sidewalk and outside? How can we have fewer cars and less pollution? So we, Uber, said, we get it. We ourselves can't go back to what was business as usual for us. We have to be not only part of a green recovery, but if we're going to be a relevant mobility provider in this century, we have to be a solution provider for the century's greatest threat, not COVID, but climate change. And so we said, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we're going to get off to the races, starting from nothing to doing something and making 800 million available in resources to drivers to help them make the switch over the next 5 years. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to commit to a target of 100% electric service in the US, Canada, and Europe by 2030, and everywhere globally that we operate by 2040. Have to get there. This puts us on a course to be a net zero company, 10 years ahead of Paris Climate Agreement by 2040. How are we going to do that? 4 actions that we're taking. I'm going to focus my comments today on the first 2 because they're most relevant to the energy conversation, but happy to answer some of the other items. First, we have to help consumers. If you open up your app, you should be able to take a low or no emission trip on demand. Second, we have to help drivers. We have to use our market power and our position in the value chain of mobility to help get them better access and deals on EVs, on EV charging, and on other policies and incentives that they'll need to make that switch, because it's a big leap to make. Third, this can't just be about EVs. It has to be about electric vehicles on 2 wheels, on 3 wheels, on 18 wheels. We have to build a multimodal offering that's consistent with the urban development needs of cities. And lastly, we have to be transparent and accountable. We released our first ever report last year, a ride share industry first on emissions from rides on Uber. Let me just dive into the items 1 and 2. And then in a few moments, I'll hand it back over to Eric to start fielding questions and engage in the discussion. So first, what are we doing to make low or no mobility options available to consumers? We launched Uber Green. This had been available in Europe for the last couple of years, but as of last year, we launched in 1,500 towns and cities around the world, including markets in the US, Canada, and Europe. Today, if you're based in the US, as I believe most of the folks on this call are, Many markets, most of our major urban markets, you will find Uber Green. You don't see it immediately when you open up your app. Just scroll down a little bit. And Uber Green, for just $1 more, you get a lower emission ride in a hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or EV. As we become more and more battery EV, we will transition that to a battery EV only product like we have in some of our main markets in Europe. Based on the data, based on actual performance of that product, we're seeing 33% emissions, lower emissions on Uber Green than on Uber X. And this includes all of the mileage that the driver does before arriving at your door or wherever you're ordering your Uber. We're really pleased to launch this. This is the only low emission on-demand mobility product in the world at this scale. We're really proud of that. And we'll be continuing this because it's so important to engage consumers. Mike mentioned this, engage consumers in this conversation around how can we move in lower carbon, more electrified ways. The second piece I mentioned is helping drivers. Obviously, the millions of drivers who participate on our platform around the world are what power the mobility services that are being offered on Uber's network. So it was really important to us to make sure that we're giving drivers as many resources as they can, because we recognize they face hurdles. They face significant financial and non-financial barriers switching from the car that they drive today to the battery EV they need tomorrow. So we've created 800 million reasons to go electric over the next 5 years for those drivers, particularly in the US, Canada, and Europe. And we have savings opportunities, earnings opportunities, and new marketplace solutions to offer drivers. And a lot of that has to do with working with partners who are already experts in how to deliver EVs for rental, EV charging, not just fast charging, but home charging solutions or near home charging solutions. We're working with new innovative companies that you might not have heard of, but they're launching new technologies in the EV space. We're taking a portfolio-based approach because no single entity, including us, has any of the answers. So we're looking to broaden this portfolio and offer an unparalleled package of opportunities for drivers to get into EVs at lower price points and access charging in more locations at lower price points. We're also engaging with a number of NGOs and policy experts to help us not only figure out how do we engage in the policy apparatus, because EV markets everywhere are very much still driven by policy, but also how do we engage in the equity conversation? Because after the last 10, 20 years of promoting EVs, the outcomes haven't been well distributed. And a lot of social and economic justice communities have not been the beneficiaries of plugs and EVs. So we want to ask ourselves, what can we do to help serve not only our drivers, but to be more thoughtful in the ways that we roll out these policies and our programs to make sure that it's an equitable electrification strategy. Last slide, then we'll turn it over to the discussion. I wanted to dig in on the infrastructure side just a little bit more. With Uber, we're an urban on-demand mobility solution service. And when drivers who use Uber go electric, they need infrastructure in slightly different ways than an average homeowner or somebody who's using the EV just for their own purposes needs. This image that you're seeing now was an exercise we did in London. We looked at our data and data we collect from drivers and said, where do drivers live and where do drivers work? So the dark blue is where you see demand from drivers. So where drivers are living or where drivers are driving. And the red dots are where chargers are. These are the slower chargers. The black dots are fast chargers. What you basically see in London is a photo negative. Drivers are living or working in places where charging does not yet exist today. This is because a lot of drivers are overrepresented by underserved communities, or communities at least underserved by charging. And so they're living and sleeping, keeping their vehicle in areas that are underserved by overnight slow charging plugs. And then they're driving in downtown areas, and downtown centers have not been a popular place for both policy and providers to put fast charging. That's what urban mobility needs if it's going to electrify. Slow charging in lower income neighborhoods, and fast charging in areas of high mobility demand, like downtown centers, airports, ferry terminals, et cetera. So we want to be working with our charging providers, others like Electrify America as well, to say, how can we bring our data to bear to understand where will charging demand be in the future and how can we play a role in helping to bring utilization to those chargers and bring a little bit more certainty about what that load will look like over time. This is just a glimpse into some of this work that we've started, but we hope to roll out tools like this in markets around the world as we make progress on our goals. That's my initial comments. I look forward to the discussion. Over to you, Eric.
Oh my goodness. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, Twitter, YouTube, delayed feed, also the fellows. What's interesting though, I do want to point out, and we're going to ask a contextual question first, but what's interesting is in the other panels, what I do is I look for buckets of questions, thematic buckets, right? And oftentimes, most times they go in different directions, but on this particular panel, I'm seeing a pattern, but we'll get to that in a second. The first question, just for context, as I go through some of these questions, very briefly, Mike and Adam, how long have you been in the transportation sector? But more importantly, the question is what have you learned that you didn't know when you arrived? It's more of a professional sort of, how long have you been in your field? What's new that you didn't expect, that you wish you knew, or that you now know and spend more time thinking about?
Great. I mean, there's a ton that I've learned. So I joined Electrify America back in 2017. So coming up on 4 years. Prior to that, I was working for about 5 years as a consultant in the energy space. So I've been around energy more broadly for a while, and really knee deep in the transportation side of things for about 4 years now. I think there's a laundry list of things that I've learned. Maybe one that's pertinent here is there is a tremendous amount of hard work and sort of on the ground interaction that goes into putting infrastructure in the ground. So, as a consultant, I lived at the level that Adam was describing, sort of seeing dots on a map and, okay, where do you want to put stations in? But to go from, okay, here's the general neighborhood that we want to put a station in, to having a station built and energized, there is a ton of hard work. There are a ton of barriers to doing it, starting from acquiring sites is quite challenging, particularly in urban areas where rent prices are high, real estate is constrained. But then going through permitting processes can be quite challenging. Each jurisdiction has its own permitting, utility interconnections, and then the utility rate structures of running those stations. And so, that's not to be discouraged. I think there's a ton of potential. There's a ton of excitement here, but it really, going from the concept of wanting more chargers out there to having them in the ground and operational, there's a really long road and a ton of folks engaged in that process.
Adam, what have you learned? I mean, Mike is the complexity of the process is multi-layered, far harder, the many moving parts, right, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen some similar things to what Mike has. So I started my career in transportation in 2001, back when EVs were not yet a thing, but I was working for the state of California Air Resources Board promoting EVs back when my dad thought I was selling golf carts. This is before Tesla, before it was cool. And then I fell into the hydrogen fuel cell world for a little while, went into impact investing, in which I was looking at all this clean tech work from the investment side, and then came back to mobility through Uber. So I've worked in transportation for close to 20 years. I'm passionate about transportation. I love moving from A to B in a number of ways. But what I've learned are, I suppose, a few things. One is it's very difficult to underestimate consumer behavior and its inertia. We consumers have ingrained tendencies that have been developed from culture, from what we learn from our parents, from where we live, from the density and urban planning of our areas, And we Americans, particularly we Californians, are very tied to our cars. We love our cars. And even when we say that we love to take the bus or love to take the train, we often use our cars most. And the data would suggest that that's very, very true. So it's very difficult to underestimate what our consumer behavior and its inertia. And that's really important for people like me and Mike who are trying to tap into what are the things that we expect from mobility and how can we give you something new while still meeting your same expectations. Very challenging. The second piece would be policy. Policy is a massive driver of transportation priorities, transportation spending. In transportation, you have, it's very uneven in terms of how the policy is distributed. You have some mobility services, which are highly, highly regulated. We're one, transit's another, taxis highly regulated. Whereas personal driving is a lot less regulated. That's changing over time, but generally speaking, you can drive as much as you want, wherever you want, in a gas-powered car and pollute as much as you like in most American roads. The last piece is going back to what Mike said was infrastructure. Infrastructure has a massive lock-in tendency. We tend to talk about carbon lock-in in buildings and industries, heavy industries that build, things that absorb energy. Infrastructure has the same power. So if you build a highway, you have basically locked in carbon emissions for the next 50 years because transportation is an undiversified sector from an energy perspective. It is mostly fossil-based. And when you built the highway, that highway is going to be filled by cars. There's just no doubt about it. And if you expand that highway to make room for or to relieve congestion, it will be filled by more cars. The data would just suggest that that is the way that it works. So that infrastructure and those choices are really, really important, and it has a long-term lock-in potential.
So to summarize, Mike, you said it's complex, and Adam, you pointed out that it takes a lot longer to make these changes happen. That's we keep hearing that theme, and we all feel the urgency to make these changes faster. So now the questions, they're coming in from everywhere, by the way. All right. So first of all, Deborah Richards from Morgan Hill. So most of them are asking not if, but how do we go faster? So Adam and Mike, you kind of gave us the context. It's complex and it takes a long time, but most of the questions, okay, EV, more, let's go. Deborah Richards from Morgan Hill says, okay, how do we go faster? On the other hand, I do want to point out, Nat, a 2014 SISE alumni, and Nadine, a 2013 alumni. Their question, it's a cautionary, and it's more geared to Adam Uber. The ride sharing can contribute to congestion in cities and then kind of defeat the purpose of the advances. So Mike and Adam, one of the questions is, how do we go more? And Nat and Nadine are asking cautionary, and it's more, I think it's more geared for Adam, but Mike and Adam, how do we go faster and how do we do it smartly?
Great. Yeah, so how do we go faster? It comes down to a couple different things. So one is policy, right? So Adam touched on this a little bit. Policy is has potential to be a huge driver in this space. Electrification from the vehicle manufacturers requires billions and billions of dollars of investment in new technologies, in battery supply, in new manufacturing capabilities. They're doing it, but policy does help drive it. It's helped drive it in Europe and China. The Biden administration's push is also helping drive that investment faster. So if you want to think about how do you accelerate that, the transition is happening one way or another, but if you want to think about accelerating it, policy certainly helps. Policy also on the infrastructure side, we've talked about how important infrastructure is to unlocking vehicle electrification, enabling both light duty vehicles and quite frankly, medium and heavy duty to go electric. Continued policy support there, whether that's investment itself or public-private partnerships, working to reduce some of the barriers out there. So there are challenges right now, not to get too deep in the weeds on utility rates, but the rate structures of utilities can be somewhat unfavorable or challenging for EV charging providers like ourselves. They're just, it's a old tariff structure that's not well set up for a new technology. And so, this is another area where policy leadership, driving change at the policy and rates level can really make a difference in unlocking investment from private parties and driving that faster growth. And then the other thing that I would say is, education makes a huge difference. We talk a lot about getting butts in seats, that when you are in an electric vehicle and you feel how quiet it is, you feel how fast and the performance it is, and obviously like you get to learn about the green benefits, that's what really makes a difference in convincing folks to go out and actually purchase or lease a vehicle. It's one of the reasons we're so excited about the work that the Uber team is doing, because it does really, it doesn't quite get folks in the driver's seat or as many in the driver's seat, but it gets millions of people in passenger seats talking to their drivers about vehicle electrification, learning about the vehicles, getting to experience them firsthand. But really, for most people across the country, an electric vehicle is something that maybe you've heard of, certainly heard of Tesla, but having that much more intimate familiarity with the product is what then drives when you go out to buy or lease your next vehicle, that drives the change in mentality and in actually adopting.
Adam, before you can talk about the congestion issue too, Mike, there was a question. Christine asked a question, but I'm going to add a layer of context here too. Christine was asking, okay, so policy can speed it up, right? And Adam's going to say, okay, and how do we do it smartly, right? Mike, your point about policy, which is on the heels of the policy panel just before you, Christina says, why is the US behind? And I think what you're saying is behind, say, some countries in Europe, which is sort of California's ahead, other states might be behind, Norway's ahead, other European countries are behind. So is it policy in both Norway and California? Is that what you're seeing, or what else is it? What else is there? And then Adam will go to your congestion.
Sure. So, and I'm definitely not the policy expert within Electrify America, so happy to pull in those folks to the conversation with individuals as necessary. What I would say is that there needs to be policy leadership on a whole host of levels, right? So it's commitments around the importance of transitioning our vehicles towards zero emission vehicles. It's also commitments around supporting developments in battery technology, battery manufacturing, making sure that those things are domestic. It's sort of across as you think about the supply chain for vehicles, it's really focused on how are we driving investment and support in all of those areas.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Adam. Good.
That's great. What I'm going to do is talk about London, because it gives a great example of both policy that helps drive things faster, market innovation that drives things faster, and then what we think is the answer on congestion. In London, we've seen drivers uptake EVs faster than any other city anywhere else in the world. And we're looking over hundreds of cities all over the world in metro markets. In London, you have two really unique policies. First, you have a congestion charge, which has been there for more than 15 years. And that congestion charge exempts EVs. The congestion charge is significant. It's like 15 pounds. That's like close to 30 bucks for entering the downtown area of London. On top of that, there's an ultra low emission zone charge. And if you drive a diesel vehicle or a petrol vehicle, or soon to be even a gas plug-in hybrid, you have to pay the charge. And it's at like close to another 15 pounds. So you could paying the congestion charge plus the emissions charge. EVs are exempted. That's 30 bucks a day that you could avoid in an EV. So London has reset economics for what vehicles make the most sense in London. and they've said EVs are what makes sense for us. And that's a strong signal. And this goes, it's on everybody. And so drivers on Uber need to switch to EVs. And so what we've done on top of those policies is we charge a small fee on every ride, on every mile from every ride. And that goes into a pot of money that drivers can use to convert to EV. So we're able to take our network, turn it into a mobility marketplace, and raise money for drivers to help them convert. So drivers can earn, several £1,000s through this scheme to convert to EV. And we've seen hundreds of drivers convert to EVs over a very short period of time. Actually, more than several thousand drivers convert over the last 2 years. So that's really, really significant, and it shows the power of policy plus market innovation in a market to go much, much faster. It also points to me to an answer on congestion. So the person who asked the question is absolutely right. According to the last survey by the US federal government, Uber, our competitors, taxi, we make up about 1% of American DMT, which means we're contributing at least 1% to congestion. In some cities at certain times of day, we've done a study that we put out in the world that can be as high as 4 or 5% of DMT. So yes, we contribute to congestion to the tune of 4 or 5%. And that's not good enough from our perspective. That needs to be better. One thing that we're trying to do is be transparent about where we see impact occurring on our platform. That's why we released our information last year, first ever ride hailing report on emissions. And in that, we break down where the emissions come from. Do they come from when the driver is driving before they got to you, or when you were in the car? And what we found is that we're outperforming the incumbent form of on-demand mobility, which is taxi. We have about half the deadhead rate, meaning half of the miles that are driven empty on Uber. It's about half of what the miles driven empty by taxi are. So we're really pleased to see that at better scale than taxi. And that's going to be an area that we need to continue to work on to be a viable service in urban areas.
Okay, thank you. So, all right. So Adele, get ready here. So we talked about urban, and Mike, this question's probably going to be geared to you, but Adam, of course, if you can contribute. Adele is going to ask the question. Mike, you referenced whirlwind growth since 2018. But probably oftentimes driven by the market. And Adele, please ask you had a question about how do you attend to the interests of and the needs of underrepresented communities, suburban communities, but also rural communities as well. I mean, that's yes, urban. Now, what about those not in urban? Adele?
Hi. Yeah, I had a quick question regarding just the motivation and the driving factors behind where you choose to place EV charging stations. And I wasn't sure if it was mainly coming from a marketing perspective, where you're trying to make EVs more appealing in these more commercial areas like strip malls or resorts. I'm just recalling the slide that you had all the different areas earlier, or is it coming from a more strategy and need-based perspective, like along a travel route or these areas where EV stations aren't as popular as in a more urban or dense area?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So big picture, our investments are focused on trying to build a sustainable infrastructure network. Okay, so it's very important that we get to a place where today the economics are quite challenging in the EV charging space. Even in urban areas, to be frank, they can be challenging. But over time, we want to be building this network to be self-sustaining and continue to flourish. So we're constantly balancing the things you're describing. We do have the benefit of our parent company is Volkswagen Group. And so we have the benefit of being tied to a vehicle manufacturer that is interested in selling cars in 50 states and selling cars to everyone, not just urban areas, but rural areas and everything in between. And so we're constantly balancing those demands, but it is really important. One of the lessons of EV charging installations over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. The original ones that went in, many of them that haven't achieved that level of self-sustaining investment are going under-maintained, right? And that provides a user experience that's not so great. You show up to the charger and it's not working, you're expecting to charge. So it's really important to us that as a network, our network is self-sustaining, that we can continue to have a great level of customer experience, great maintenance and operations, because that's what drives driver confidence. It's what continues to be like a self-fulfilling prophecy around vehicle adoption. So I guess long story short, it's a challenge and it's a balance. We definitely have to think about station economics, but we do also want to make sure we're supporting, the vehicle electrification, not just in, LA and San Francisco, but across the country.
Are we good with that? Okay. So, all right. So if we're going to electrify transportation, if that's where we're going, and many of the questions also have to do with buses and scooters and globally, and I mean, you name it. But Chatyana and Arwa I'll call you because Chatyana, I don't know if we can, your Wi-Fi you mentioned, it was struggling, but the question is all right, so if we electrify transportation, what about the electricity that goes into the vehicle? Not always clean. Not always clean. I know this is outside. I mean, you're dependent upon that source, but there are some questions for both of you about this. Arwa, what you had a more specific question. Go ahead, Arwa.
Yeah, hi. So I understand that EV do not emit carbon dioxide like directly while running, but charging the battery still requires energy to operate. So where is the energy coming from in the charging stations? Like, is it powered by solar, for example, or other renewable energy source, or just the conventional fossil fuel sources?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there's actually a lot of resources on this one. It's also a complex question because short of a very, very small segment of the EV chargers that are taking that are solely based on solar at the site, almost all charging stations are fed off the grid. There are efforts to then offset the emissions of specific parts of the grid, right, with renewable energy credits or other investments in the space. So there's definitely efforts on that front. Couple things I would point you to. So one is the Union of Concerned Scientists has done a lot of research around sort of how clean are electric vehicles relative to their ICE counterparts. So I would point you to that there was a study that came out back in 2020 that found that even as you look across the country at sort of the emissions coming from different parts of the grid, the average MPG of miles per gallon of an electric vehicle works out to around 88 miles per gallon today across the country. So that's far higher than the gas-powered vehicles that we have today. And the grid is getting cleaner every year, right? So as more and more renewables come on across the country, we see more and more efficient and cleaner driving. So it's a bit of a complex answer. I think we're certainly in a good place today relative to ICE vehicles and continuing to get better every day.
Just two things to add to that. It's a great question, Arwa, and Mike answered it beautifully. Just one, for Europe, it's a similar answer. It's something like 23 or 24 of the 27 EU member states, an EV is cleaner than any possible petrol-fired vehicle today. There are fuel holdouts like Poland and Malta who use a lot of coal, where that's not true. But they're getting cleaner by the day, as Mike said. Then second, if you look at really broadly, like step way back, if you look at the energy sector, its decarbonization rate is way faster than almost any other sector because they're adding solar, they're adding wind to the grid in markets all over the world. Transportation, on the other hand, is the only sector moving in the wrong direction. It's not decarbonizing as it grows. We have not decoupled transportation, its economics from the level of output it puts into in terms of CO2. And the last thing I'll say, since I'm a policy guy, as a regulator, I would much rather regulate about a dozen power sources than tens of millions of cars.
All right, thank you. So the next, we're running out of time. We're trying to bundle them all. So not surprising, there are a number of questions. Another bucket is, tell us about the technology of tomorrow today. What do you see? It's obvious, it talks about e-scooters in India. Sam has mentioned the benefits of hydrogen. On the delayed feeds, we have a group, Fifth Order Industries, asking about fan technology for flying cars. So we got the gamut of new technologies. I was wondering if both of you, if you had to keep an eye, and we got to keep an eye on the times. We're going to start wrapping up. But if you could help us see what's tomorrow look like today.
Do you want to go first? You probably have the broader view of transportation collectively.
You go.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so. I think there's a couple of great trends. First of all, batteries continue to get just better and better. And mostly it's to do with the fact that all of us are consuming so many phones. What number phone are you on in your lifetime? You're probably on your 5th, 6th, 10th phone. So battery generations have just accelerated, and that's making all batteries better. There's new solid state batteries on the horizon, other types of battery technologies that are coming up that are quite good. And charging tech is getting faster and faster. The type of chargers Mike has been talking about, including 350 kilowatt chargers, is insane and wasn't even imagined a decade ago. And they're entering the world because we're getting better at cooling technology, et cetera. That's all really good. The second thing that is getting better is marketplace technologies, and Uber is a marketplace technology. We help match supply and demand. We do so in the mobility space. As the energy sector starts to do that, matching supply and demand with a smart grid, we can get better, cleaner grid, and we can get higher power where it's needed, when it's needed. And the grid that we have can be transformed from kind of a dumb grid to a smart one where we can move power in the cleanest form to those who need it, and we can price it based on that supply and demand in more real time. That will really, really, really help. Another trend, which we're certainly part of, is trying to move things from used to just go out and buy the thing and then you use the thing all the time. That's what we do with cars today. If we can make mobility more of a service, it should be easier to package and bundle that service in a way that responds to, goes back to the thing I said earlier, which is consumer preference, consumer demand. Consumers want convenience, affordability, ease, something that's really, really simple. If we can unbundle the incredible bundle that the car is, that the car that you own is, into a set of services that people really want at a more attractive price point and something that's more convenient, people will use it. And so we're certainly a part of that trend. We wouldn't be the only answer. We would probably be the thing that you use every once in a while when transit's not working. But that would be a really good trend to continue in terms of mobility as a service. The last thing I'll say, which is, I think, on the climate side, we're seeing a tipping point. This last year has been a massive year of reflection for the world as we think about how do we approach collective problems as a species. And the prevailing winds from both industry leaders and political leaders are, we absolutely have to decarbonize. So that will have massive implications. It will mean that we can't build cities the same way anymore. We can't build cars the same way anymore. We can't build infrastructure the same way anymore. And so that should have a sweeping effect. We all need to be part of that. It's not going to happen unless we do something about it. But to me, I feel the tide flowing in the right direction on that. We need to push.
Yeah, that was great, Adam. Just, my purview is much more constrained around sort of on-road vehicles typically. I think Adam hit on a lot of the key points there. Definitely, as battery technology is getting better, it's not only creating more efficient vehicles and more efficient driving. It's also unlocking all sorts of new technologies that weren't possible previously. So it unlocks, new types of vehicles that can be used. It unlocks new ways that those vehicles can be used. So that part is really exciting. Other things, Adam touched on charging speeds, and I touched on this previously. Adam mentioned, 350 kilowatt charging there was not a single charger deployed in the US 5 years ago, not a single one, and no vehicles that could accept it. And now, we have thousands of them out there today. We will have more and more coming. And we're seeing more and more vehicle manufacturers now bringing 800 volt architecture vehicles, which is what's required to use a 350 kilowatt charger, right? And it typically starts at a premium level. So, the new Hummer, for example, will come out with 800 volt architecture, but that then trickles down to all of the other vehicles under GM's brands, right? It starts out and then expands. And so, and you see that across a whole host of different manufacturers. You see that the Hyundai Ioniq 5 will also have an 800 volt architecture. So you're seeing charging speeds increasing together with the battery technology. You're seeing huge improvements there. It's unlocking not just light duty uses, but more and more uses, particularly as we get into the medium and heavy duty space. Today, what's practical with the vehicles that are available today is sort of runs from a distribution center. I've got a set route that I'm running over and over again. And I can charge up each time I come back to the distribution center or a set point, right? But as those technologies get better, it unlocks more longer distances, more routes. As higher charging powers come, there's a lot of work that my colleagues are doing with a group called Charin to spec out megawatt level charging, particularly for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So you think like 350 kilowatt charging is a lot, right? And so this is 3x plus up above that. And that's what's needed to charge, the heavy duty vehicles of tomorrow. And so there's a lot of work being done there. That stuff is moving at a tremendous pace. And if you look out, even 5 years from today, the landscape is going to be totally different.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. So to summarize, Mike, that's moving at a tremendous pace, yet, and transportation is leading this way. Yet some of the challenges kind of overlap. Some of the challenges, policy making. Also, I heard the marketplace where you're making contributions, Uber Green, to Electrify America's efforts in the communities, in rural communities. There are inherent challenges, but you also mentioned new technologies, but also undoing habits and cultures, such as transportation as a service too. So I think, and then, by the way, Adam, you don't know this, but you had mentioned, I'm going to quote you in the next panel, we can't build cities the same way anymore. We have the next speakers at 1 o'clock Central are designers of new cities. So there we go, Adam, you helped us with a segue as well. Fast changes, fast coming changes. It's yet not fast enough either. It's going to be an interesting next few years. Thank you both so much. Thank you very much. It was still head spinning with all the different themes that we've covered. We covered a lot of ground.